With that, without further ado, I would like to introduce tonight's speakers. We have an excellent panel of speakers. We have Nardo Manaloto from Qubits Ventures. We have Lisheng Wang from Propel. We have Tricia Martinez from Techstars Industries of the Future, and Tricia from Tech Coast Angels. If you don't mind, I would like to ask you guys to have a brief intro about yourself, and then we'll dive into the topics for tonight's discussion. Nardo, would you like to start and go around?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mariano. Thanks for having me here. This is another exciting event here, talking about quantum and photonics and the startup funding space. So I'm Nardo Manaloto, managing partner for Qubits Ventures. Qubits Ventures is a pre-seed tech fund specializing in quantum and photonics startup companies. This is quite a new fund that started last year, and have invested in 4 different companies to date, and looking forward to sharing my learnings, my insights in this space.
That's great. Thank you, Nardo. Please go ahead, Chris.
Thanks, Mariano. Thanks for having me. So I am from Tech Coast Angel, currently on the executive board, been doing angel investment for a number of years now. And just a little bit of background around TCA, about TCA. We've invested in C, pre-seed Series A startups. Last year alone, we invested in a total of about 60 deals with around 20 million in capital invested. Very happy to share more of a perspective from the angel investors lens. And in addition to my investment opportunity or investment gig, I also have a corporate gig in about 16 years in tech career, ranging from multinational public companies to earlier stage startups as executives. So hopefully to share that experience as part of this panel as well. Thank you for having me. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Chris. Great to have you here. Tricia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Hey, everyone who's joined in. My name's Tricia Martinez. I'm the managing director for Techstars Industries of the Future Accelerator and Techstars Payments Accelerator. Industries of the Future is a deep tech focused program. So we're investing in companies across AI, quantum, biotech, clean tech, advanced manufacturing, and 5G. Our partners are Oak Ridge National Lab, so the largest Department of Energy national lab, one of the leaders in quantum research, as well as Tennessee Valley Authority and the University of Tennessee. I'm also a Techstars alum and a serial entrepreneur. Super passionate about helping amazing founders who can change the world. We have so many big problems before us. Quantum can help address some of those. Here to support you guys. If you're interested in Techstars, please feel free to reach out.
Thank you, Tricia. Lisheng.
All right. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. And it's a very impressive panel of panelists. Very impressive background. I would love to get to know each other after the meeting. My name is Lisheng. I'm one of the co-founders of Propel. I manage our investments on the platform. Propel is I believe we are the earliest deep tech online investment community. We started back in 2015. So far, we have funded, I think, 120 rounds of financing now, I think 80 plus counting portfolio companies. We're in deep tech, basically in the larger categories of life sciences, computing, as well as sustainability. And prior to Propel, I was also one of the co-founders of Propel at the MIT Alumni Angel Group here in the Bay Area. I'm still sitting on the steering committee. That group also focuses on deep tech investing. Prior to that, I was in banking for most of my career. and in corp dev, as well as portfolio management. I did my software gig at Microsoft in the 90s. Haven't been writing software code for a long time, but looking forward to hopefully using the next wave of quantum algorithms to write computing programs.
Yes, definitely we all do. Well, so thanks everybody for joining. I think we have an excellent panel, and I would like to sort of start with a kind of general warm-up question about the challenges that you've seen through the years for early stage startups that are looking for funding. What would you say are the biggest challenges, in particular looking at deep tech, startups at an early stage? What are kind of common mistakes or best practices to follow for somebody starting a business in this field? Lisheng, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think anytime start a business, right, I think the key is really the technology, the business market you're going into. I think, it doesn't matter what time. If you want to start a company, you definitely should do it. But in terms of funding environment, I would say it's not just the deep tech. It's across the border spectrum. You see a little bit of, early stage investors, venture investors started tightening up a little bit. I think for early stages, mostly angels and families, because the market condition today in the public markets, probably everyone is aware, all the tech stocks have been down 75, 80%. So I think that, psychologically, people think that's wealth that's destroyed. A lot of times, a lot of people actually have their eyes off private investing for a while, and they just focus on public markets and hopefully save some dry powders to bottom fishing. And in the VC space, I think things are slightly different. I think it's not necessarily they don't want to invest. They've raised the funding. It's their job to invest. It's more like a uncertainty in the interest rate, because everyone knows the valuation model. Interest rate plays a pretty big role in determining the futuristic value of the company. So without knowing eventually where we're going to end with interest rate and what kind of interest rate we're looking at, let's say in a year and 2 years down the road, it's very hard to evaluate the company. So some VCs kind of use that as an excuse, I would say, to kind of pause investing, wanted to see how things pan out eventually. But I do think that early stage is an area probably less impacted, just because, especially in quantum and photonics, probably looking at 7 years out to have an exit. So I think that still is an area that I think people would be looking into investing. I would probably say that because private investing, the liquidity has come down a little bit, starting beginning the start of the year. I do think that maybe looking into public funding, such as SBIR, SCTR, or some of the other grant opportunities to start your company. I think that has been kind of a funding source for a lot of deep tech companies.
Yeah. I mean, you definitely raise a few points, a few valid points, and I'd like to get back to those. But maybe let's listen to what others have to say. Tricia, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I'll hop in on the very early side, right? Like Techstars, every program is run differently. As an MD, I prefer to invest in super early stage businesses. Like if I've met a scientist at a lab who was just building great technology and didn't even have a business idea, I would say, hey, come with me, let's go figure this out together. But I think the complexity with deep tech is that this is novel technology. And with novel technology, you oftentimes have much more risk averse VCs because they don't know what that market's going to look like. So you have to rely more on angels and SBIR, non-dilutive funding, early on. But a problem I've seen a lot for technologists has been product market fit. I've been in the lab, I've worked on my PhD, I have a great technology. Now I'm trying to figure out what the solution is, or I'm searching for a problem. And as an entrepreneur, I think that's the completely wrong approach. However, there is great technology sitting across our laboratories and in facilities that can solve big problems and change the world. But we have to work with entrepreneurs through programs like Techstars to really help them pull those technologies apart, assess the market, figure out what the problem is that they're solving. So I think product market fit is a big one. And then because of that, it leads to fundraising problems. And I see Nardo smiling and laughing a bit. So he understands or agrees with some of those comments.
Oh, absolutely, Tricia. I definitely wanted to chime in on this one. So yeah, I think one of my favorite questions that I always ask, early stage companies is like, what kind of company are you? and basically that is a hard question for them to answer because there's a couple of things, right? So one is they haven't really figured out the problem or the real problem. That's one. The other portion to it is really, this technology has so much capability, and I often hear we're going to start it off as a platform, and which we can pretty much do everything and anything, right? So I am with you on that, Tricia. I think the journey to basically, if you do a lot more work in figuring out and harnessing what is that problem you're trying to solve, especially in quantum. In quantum, the issue with quantum, it's such a new technology that it's definitely paradigm shifting, that a lot of the use cases haven't really been uncovered yet. So I think that portion of it, there's a lot of exploration that needs to happen in the space, and to get to that product market fit that they're looking for, it requires a little bit more, I would say, creative thinking.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you guys are spot on this, and it's a common problem for most scientific or technology-based companies to start from a technology and then look for a market, and that then boils down to how much runway you need to develop your product and develop the market. But I would like to hear what Chris has to say. Yeah.
Thank you. So just to kind of echo on what Nardo, Tricia, Lisheng have mentioned, right? So it's definitely very important to initially, especially proceed to focus on your product market fit. The ability to demonstrate some sort of traction early on is very, very important for your investor, right? Whether it is accomplishing some milestones or strategic partnerships or pre-sales. And just in addition to that, I think it's also important because I've looked at a lot of seed stage or pre-seed stage company, right? Especially in deep tech, right? It's important that you not just have technical gurus on the team, but also really strong business operators, right? So investors also care about how you will be spending the money, and also the day-to-day operations per se, right? Not just solely on the technical elements. So many times we have to there were contingent deals, right? So before the co-founders can get our funding, they have to go out and recruit an operator to help manage some of these spending down the road. The other part is really, really important is the business mode, right? So these are very deep quantum, deep tech companies, right? So we want to make sure that the product itself is defensible. I mean, ability to maintain its competitive edge over a longer period of time, right? How you can manage to defend our competition. Is your IP really defensible? Can you deliver sustainable business value over time, right? And finally, having a very clear exit strategy, right? So what will be the future looking at, how you're going to come to an exit or even profitability at some point in the future.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, there's definitely a number of points that would deserve an entire discussion. But I wanted to go back to something that Lisheng mentioned earlier, in sort of focusing on very early stage companies. That's kind of our space right now. How should they go? How would you recommend to go about fundraising? There's a number of different avenues that they may take. There's non-diluted funding, there's private capital, there is corporate, there's strategic partnerships. I mean, and of course, this can be a significant challenge for the founders. And how would you recommend somebody to go about the first steps in this direction? Maybe Chris, you can comment on that, and then we'll go back to the other.
Sure, we'll go in reverse order this time, right? So, like I said, we look at a lot of pre-seed and seed, right? So, I think realistically, at the very beginning of the beginning stage of the company, right, it makes more sense to seek out like angel investors or micro VCs to provide the initial funding. Versus like strategic partner, which could be at a slightly later stage when you try to seek, let's say, collaborative development agreement or some sort of distribution arrangement, right? So it's at the early stage. I think the value that an angel investor can bring is really the mentorship, right, and also even more importantly, the ability to make meaningful business connection for the founders, right? The founders during this time is very, very, very important to focus on the R&D and then also finding the right part of market fit. And by leveraging angel investors, you could build their network. More importantly, you could potentially like tap into areas that you might not have the ability as a founder yourself, right, to tap into, right? So this is definitely very important, in my opinion. I would like to potentially hear from Nardo, I guess, from more of a VC's perspective, how he feel about this particular topic.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Hey, I thought we were going the other way. But anyway. So my thoughts on this, quantum is definitely, there's a lot of research that normally happens with this one. It is such a deep tech and deep science, a combination of both, and a lot of weirdness in between, right? So with quantum, I would highly suggest that you go definitely do a lot of non-dilutive type of approaches first, right? SBIRs. STTRs, as Lisheng mentioned, and there are other types of matching programs that goes along with that, right? So you have to look at those matching programs where you get an additional 50 cents to the dollar that you get investments from VC, right? So you could always tap onto that side of things. So from an early stage standpoint, the federal government is a good one, especially for this technology. And as you know, President Biden has signed many initiatives in this space to basically spur a lot of quantum innovation. So there's definitely dollars pouring in there. And then the other component, this one I recently learned, where if your product, from a government standpoint, also is part of like a dual use type scenario, there are actually other funding sources that you could do because of that dual use of the technology portion. So that's another area that you guys also need to kind of look at from an early stage standpoint. And then the last one is, depending on how far the technology is off, from a commercialization standpoint, so some of these quantum technologies are more earlier than later, right? So for example, anything that has to do with quantum inspired application where you create quantum algorithms that can go inside of a classical computer, right? So that is a hybrid type scenario. You could get that tested with proof of concepts with companies, large companies that are interested in this space, like big pharma, right? So big pharma, let me tell you the scenario of the big enterprises in terms of their quantum programs. There was a survey done last year of 400 different companies, big companies, in terms of whether they have a quantum program already happening. 70% basically have that already. So the whole proof of concept aspect is already there. So I would say take advantage of that as well.
Sounds great. Thanks, Nardo. Tricia, did you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, I think that, the earlier stage you are, and depending on what technology readiness level you're at, you definitely need to be tapping into non-dilutive funding. later on, VCs want to see that you've de-risked and that you've already conducted all of this R&D and you know the technology is ready for the market. So get as much resources you can get from every agency, DOE, DOD, DOT, like they're all putting money towards SBIR and STTR. It's a pain in the ass to go through the process, but there are groups and accelerators who can help you navigate that to make it a little bit easier. So free money is always the best bet. The second piece that I think that you will likely have to rely on, and I tell my companies this, are angel investors. Like, it is your job as a founder to go spread your mission and excite people about this big vision you have. And so early on in the days that you're building, while you might be in the lab refining the technology, you still have to build this vision and get people on board and excited and mobilize them, because at the end of the day, angels might be the ones who help push you forward and get you to market, since some VCs may not be willing to jump in too early or take that risk with you. So when I was building my company, a blockchain company, and it was a novel tech in Africa at the time, we had to rely on angels to survive, to get our product to market. So make sure you're always networking, seeking out high net worth individuals who are interested in the space that you're in, and get them on board with your vision.
Yeah, totally agree. And probably also look at former, successful entrepreneurs in the field who may be experts and may understand your technology. And so kind of, have an easier conversation with them, sort of, they can see through the risk of the technology much more easily than an angel investor who is just doing this from a financial point of view. But that's a great suggestion. Lisheng, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, first of all, I think we have a great panel. If you look at the spectrum of investors here, right? You have the angel investor, you have Techstars, right? You have a VC fund, and then you have online investment platform. So we're here because we're still looking for projects, right? Mm-hmm. So first and foremost, that's a good thing. I think other than the traditional, fundraising channels, online channel has become a bigger and bigger funding source for a lot of early stage companies. So look into that, right? I think we're probably just one of them. There are many others as well. I think some panelists have mentioned, again, the public funding. I do believe, other than I think, SBIR and STTR, there are also very specific quantum designated funds out of I think a DOE or DAPA, and so you should definitely look into these. Also, there are some mission-driven families that supports quantum driven computing as well, or computing and photonics in general. So there are a lot of resources out there. You can probably search up for these families. And I would also say that in terms of when to raise venture funding, I would suggest that just assess your business to see whether you're still doing a lot of the R&D, or whether the product is in some form ready to be commercialized. Because all the investors, right, doesn't matter if the angel investors or VC investor, there is a time horizon they're looking for. Unless it's evergreen fund like Engine from MIT, or some of the evergreen fund, like this long-term 15-year fund. Otherwise, they're looking for a reasonable exit in, let's say, 7 or 10 years. So if you spend your first 4 or 5 years doing research, the chances are very limited, and these guys are going to fund you, right? So if your product is still largely in the R&D phase, you don't even have MVP, and you don't have any potential customer partnerships or potential kind of LOIs, maybe think more about raising private funding from foundations, from government sources. And once you have that very critical problem you're trying to solve, I think a couple panelists mentioned that already, you know that you have a problem, and you also have the technical solution. And then at that point, you should talk to not only angel investors, right, but also potentially family and friends, because they would trust you more than anyone else. And if you do believe in your own mission, and these are the first people you should contact, right? Yeah, I think the other thing is actually think about maybe follow on in a tough economic environment, especially in the deep tech, because oftentimes it involves kind of hardware development. It does need a little bit more capital and time to be successful. So think about how do you be lean, right? And when you raise the early stage angel funding, how do you last as long as possible before that VC funding, which might be very hard to come by in the next couple of years? And think about that, right? How do you develop something that's capital lean? And hopefully the business model and also the corporate structure is also lean.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, and speaking of investors and you know, building your networks of angel investors, you know, maybe friends and family, like you were mentioning, how you know, how do you find that investor that is right for you? What would be his or her, you know, characteristic? What should you be looking for? What kind of value can they add to your company? I know the investment, you know, scenarios now may be different from the past few years, but I wanted to hear your opinion on what would be, you know, the important characteristics to be looking for in an investor. Do you want to go first, Lisheng?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I think a mission has to be aligned, right? You're not looking for someone who's just caught on the quantum bug, or you know, they just watched a quantum video and they super hyped about quantum, has no idea about how long it's going to take or what it takes to build a successful company. Of course, initially, like any money is good, but you know, you want to have maybe money from a little bit experienced investors. Otherwise, some investors can be a little bit how to say, annoying, right? They don't understand it, and then the expectation is not, you know, they had the wrong expectation, and you probably want to align that expectation with them when you get their money. And the other thing is actually, if you look at the different aspects of the business, right? Anyone who can help you initially connect with investors, first of all, they have to be aligned, and second of all, they have to be an investor in you. Otherwise, the referrals might not work that well, because you know the people they refer and they say, "Have you invested?" "Oh, you know what? I haven't invested." Then typically these referrals does not mean much. So you want to convince that investor first, and then that investor will be the ambassador for you to introduce you other investors. That's one. And if you get investment from the angel group, right, and these people can definitely help you to spread the word. And the same with our group. We have a lot of online investors, and that can really help you to introduce investors to you and bring other resources. But then the next thing is actually in quantum, because the risk, because it's a novel technology, not that many companies dare to try, right? They want to be safe. So if you have an investor who can really open doors to these Fortune 500 companies, at least get some kind of NRE in place, a pilot program in place, and that will be a very good investor. And finally, if an investor can really bridge to the follow-on rounds, they know some VC funds and really connect with them, and that will be another very valuable resource.
Yeah. Tricia, what do you look for in your investors when you connect with them?
Yeah, so one thing is definitely dumb money is real. So you need to, as a founder, you have to do the due diligence. They're not only diligencing you, like you need to assess this individual fund, whatever it is. The worst thing you could do is bring dumb money, and dumb money can basically be an investor who thinks they have more ownership or the ability to put more influence on the company. If an investor is taking a board seat, that means they are on your team forever. So you have to be careful as a founder for who you're bringing on, because you could potentially be with them indefinitely. Angel investors, I would say, are the way I looked at angel investors were people who who heard my vision and were so supportive of me that they just wanted to back me and let me run with it. They were my biggest supporters and my cheerleaders. That's what you want. You don't want people who are going to be way too hands-on and expect to be really involved in the company. If that's the case, then you would end up hiring someone or have them as an official advisor. So, you have advisory boards, a board of director, angel investors. Try to keep these things separate. Maybe an angel ends up becoming an advisor, but remember, like, you're bringing in money and you want investors to understand why they're putting in money and that they're putting trust in you and that they believe in you to support you. So do your due diligence as well. You don't want to be bringing in the wrong money. Even though it might feel great that someone wants to invest, at the end of the day, you might say, this relationship just doesn't feel right. And sometimes you have to trust your gut if it doesn't feel right.
Sounds good. Yeah, that's very true. Chris, did you want to give your thoughts on that?
Sure. I just kind of echo on what Tricia has mentioned earlier, right? So it's definitely pretty scary to take on dumb money, in my experience. So I've witnessed like there were instances when people were founders raised friends and family round and with a pretty ridiculous valuation, and it actually made them much more difficult to raise subsequent funding because of that. So you definitely want to be on the cautious end of that, and obviously there's a lot of opportunities out there, like for you to raise money. If you could land a strategic partnership or strategic institution investment early on, that will be very helpful, especially in deep tech. I think because of the many quantum computing use cases and like simulations, optimization, AI, ML, or crypto, or cryptography, or many of that. So there are definitely many strategic institution funds that might be interested in your company. So it's definitely worth exploring those menus.
Yeah, definitely. Nardo, do you have any thoughts?
Oh yeah, I get this asked a lot, right? So because just like what Tricia was mentioning, because it's definitely it's a get to know each other stage. It's not a one-way street where hey, the investor is supposed to know the startup and the startup is not supposed to know the investor in a deeper manner, right? So the way I look at it is, the opposite of dumb is smart. And what smart money consists of is really about, well, first of all, is this investor even investing in my area, right? So do they know the area? The second aspect of it is I normally look at it and say, well, what other value add can an investor bring, right? So can the investor bring a good network of people that's within the space, so they can help me either build my team or build potential hires and even get into the co-founding space if there are some gaps within the companies, right? So the network is definitely very important. I think another one that I would ask, if I were a startup, would be, well, you're one fund, you're doing pre-seed, who else are your other funders that you're connected to that can basically say, if you invest in me after your due diligence, who are other investors that you normally partner with, right? So I think those are the kind of things that you'd like to ask. And then maybe the last one is more of like, okay, well, you've given me mentors, you've given me some co-investment type scenario. The last one would be more around, well, how can you help accelerate me, right? So a lot of these quantum companies and photonics companies as well, they're interested in manufacturing capabilities of foundries, right? So do you have a network of foundries? Do you have a network of people that can help create prototypes and design chips and create components and so on and so forth, right? So I think you also have to look at all of the different value adds that an investor can bring besides just money. So when you're talking about smart money, it's really about that value add component.
Yeah, definitely, very true. Yeah, something that is specific to quantum, quantum and photonics. is, these technologies typically have a longer than average kind of investment horizon before they come to fruition. And as an investor in deep tech, especially early stage deep tech, I mean, how do you deal with that challenge? What do you think, Nardo?
So dealing with the challenge with investors?
Yeah, as an investor, I mean, now talking from an investor point of view, how do you deal with the challenge of having a sort of a long time horizon in the quantum?
Oh yeah. Okay. So the way I look at it is normally when you have to really work with these startups, right? So whenever they tell you a story, they say, oh, maybe one story is my company is building a quantum computer, and how long it'll take to build a quantum computer, right? So the second question, I normally ask, okay, well, that sounds like a great end goal. And in order for your startup to actually survive, you need to make sure that you could create some level of product sequencing or product roadmap that could be easy, that could have a potential marketability sooner than later. Have you thought about how to create a roadmap that can actually help you build the market and help you build traction and revenue? And for a lot of times, actually, that is something that they need to ponder on, because they're always thinking about the end game. Sometimes they forget about, okay, well, this is a business that I'm building, and I basically step them through in terms of, okay, well, this is how you actually build a product roadmap, and what are these different things that can kind of build on top, that can build on each other, so you could reach your end goal, right? So for a good example would be, I'm just making this up, from a quantum computing perspective, if somebody's building a quantum computer, maybe they could say quantum computer in 10 years, but the first 2 years would be like quantum photonics detectors, right? Then the second would be an integrated chip. So you can see how the sequence of a product can build the market for the company that eventually builds upon the attaining their bigger goal.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. Chris, did you have any comment?
From an investor's perspective, or
yeah, from an investor's perspective, sort of dealing with very early stage deep tech companies that may need a long runway before they come to fruition. How do you deal with that?
I think that's less of a challenge for early stage investor like us, right? We're investing pre-seed and seed, and usually the life cycle is like 7 to 10 years, as Lisheng mentioned earlier. So I think it's important to create a diversified portfolio as individual investors. Now, TCA, we have a number of angel investment funds as well, so we could better diversify our investment, place different bets into different companies. So that itself becomes less of a concern, right? And I think overall, if you dilute your portfolio enough into different investments, you can get a pretty decent return, right? For our funds, we're targeting anywhere between like 25 to 35 IRR individually for each fund. So I think that's just my take, right? But and you could, as investors, you could individual investors like angels. Sometimes we also look at other asset class in terms of investment, right? So you could hedge against some of these longer term like moonshots, like quantum computing, for example. Yeah. So I think, and also the other thing is, as investors, you want to be very careful in terms of like the deal selection, especially some of these like deep tech companies, making sure that there's enough runway, and then and also from a founder's perspective, right, that we got some really good founders with a track record, entrepreneurial track records, and other things is like my advice, I guess, general advice for founders and entrepreneurs is that because the capital market, how it's behaving today, and like VCs and capital providers has has pulled back a little bit, right? It's important to be frugal and also like bootstrap as long as you can before seeking the next round of capital. And I think that's something that we as investors are also looking at as well in terms of how you are spending the money before placing the bet.
Good. Yeah, Tricia, did you have any comment on your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, echoing what everyone said, the deep tech space is interesting in that, you know, it's still, it's an underdeveloped ecosystem. There's still not enough funding within the ecosystem, and there are more and more companies that are going to be coming out. So, you know, in my opinion, this is the future of tech. So we will see it blow up in the next 5 or so years. But right now, the way I look at a lot of the companies that I support and invest in are, they're not going to go IPO or become massive, multi-billion-dollar companies. They're likely going to get acquired by a large corporate because they're mainly B2B or even B2G, building a great technology that a huge company could be utilizing. And so I think that a 5 to 7 year exit is still likely for a lot of these companies. And I don't think the investment strategy ends up being different. For my program, I probably wouldn't take 10 quantum companies. One, because I don't think I would find 10 quantum companies to come in this accelerator. I would find a lot of AI companies, and oftentimes a lot of those companies are software solutions, B2B, that are easier to get to market and scale. So again, it's kind of like diversifying portfolio. It would be great if we could get 10 great quantum companies into an accelerator. That means the market is growing and there's huge opportunity. But I think it's just about assessing where the deep tech market is, and most investors understand the risk that they're getting involved in.
Yeah, we're definitely working on that, and hopefully we'll get as many companies involved with accelerating quantum. Lisheng, did you want to chime in, and then maybe we'll get to audience questions before?
Yeah, just very quickly, I think everyone said really, really well. I think one thing I resonate really well is when you build a hardware or a deep tech company, especially has a hardware component to it, and you want to definitely build out the product roadmap. Why do you need that? Because you need that to convince initial investors to come in, right? So investors always, they want to support the mission, but end of the day, they also want to make financial returns, right? So if you have multiple products to showcase that you made a progress, one, you might be acquired at multiple points, right? During journey, you want to build a quantum computer, you want to build a fusion, you might not be eventually acquired for that purpose. But you have, let's say, built some sensors, some computing algorithms that's good enough to build that end game, right? So you might be acquired for that. There might be IBM or Microsoft, that bigger companies, and they want to acquire you for your specific kind of technical solutions you build. The other thing is actually build a killer team, because oftentimes you see that some of the company got acquired, even though things might not pan out as the way that you want it. But if you have a killer team, and these are all great people in that specific emerging technology area, you might be acquired for that. And that's another exit strategy. So it also, I think, when I often talking to mobility companies that are serving the automobile industry, it's the same analogy. Is that you don't build for, because any product you build and you can sell to automakers takes 5 to 7 years, right? And that's a cycle. So you don't want to build for, you want it to have maybe in a near term revenue, maybe building for robotics, maybe building for healthcare industries that using the same sensor. The more shots on goal you have, you serve different industries, the better you are, and potentially more investors will be interested.
Yeah. Thank you. So I think I'm enjoying very much the discussion with you guys, but I would like to have time to get to the audience questions. So I'll read them for you, and maybe one of us can answer. So the first one is from Genevieve. There's been a lot of discouragement from those I interact with in the academic community that the competition for federal funding is so fierce and chances of getting funded are very slim without having a principal investigator who has already won grants on the team. So she's a PhD candidate, and in the eye of academics, she talks to who have won grants, there is little credibility for federal grants. Is this true? And if I work under university name, is the IP owned by university? So question about how easy it is to get federal funding as a starter, and if the IP is owned by the university, how to deal with that. Who wants to take the question? Maybe Tricia, I see you.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I worked at Department of Energy, so helped a lot of companies navigate this. So I mean, the competition is good. There's a lot of money being deployed for non-dilutive funding, but it's your job to try to strengthen your application as much as possible. So a lot of the companies that went through my program are working with like Oak Ridge or University of Tennessee to co-author their applications together, and that will help them stand out a bit more. SBIR groups will probably tell you it doesn't matter, but there are individuals who are reviewing these, and those individuals have biases. So having a known name will always increase your chances, I think. So of course, it's good to add a well-known entity or individual to your application. That means you then have to hustle, go find the top researchers, connect with the national labs, with various universities, try to tap into those resources to figure out how you can engage and get co-authors for those applications. And in regards to IP, you 100% have to check. Oftentimes, like it's a complicated area. It can be really confusing. The universities will generally have like either research foundations or just like legal groups that manage all the IP engagements. So make sure before you engage deeper that IP, that you understand who owns the IP, that you likely will end up having to license whatever is co-developed. Oftentimes investors don't really want you to have to license things. We want you to own all of the IP because that's where your secret sauce is. So if you can avoid having to license, that's the ultimate goal.
Yeah, very true. And if I may add from personal experience, a lot of the agencies have industry days. They have days dedicated to connecting with, connecting their program managers with entrepreneurs and groups that want to propose projects. So go to those industry days, meet them in person, make yourself known. You never know, but the personal connection always helps. And when they have a program that's going to be targeted for your area of expertise, they will let you know, or they may even ask you to submit a proposal. So in my own experience, I found that they have to basically they have their own career. And based on your success, they will look good to their own bosses. So they want to invest in a way on the winning horse. So that's you need to establish that relationship. Yeah. So there's another question from Ian.
so Mariano, I just want to chime in on the.
Sure.
Hold on. So just to add on to that, so in the quantum area right now, I think because there's such a lot of unknowns in the space, and the novelty of the technology is still here, right? So from a federal standpoint, they're definitely beefing up the funding in the space, right? As you've probably seen a lot of the announcements on the quantum side. So it really depends, right? So for example, if you have, I know of a healthcare company, they basically have done have gotten 1 million per year every year for the last 13 years. And they just remain a healthcare research company, right? And that never commercialized their technology. And they have, good people in the team that's, repeat, right? So it definitely helps. But if you're going after an area that is quite unknown still and quite novel and have a lot of federal interest, I think as long as you create your application that has a meaningful and useful way of incorporating the technology like quantum into what you're doing, I think that there's probably more opening at this point than not. So I think it's really, what stage that technology is in and what the interest of the from a federal standpoint they're looking at this from, right? So that's one. I think the other piece I just wanted to add on to Tricia, IP is definitely very important. You have to look at IP not just from a university standpoint, but also from the people that are, you're co-developing your research and product with, right? So if you work with the DoD and the DOE and all of that, you also have to kind of look at that. Sometimes it's a little bit of a slippery slope. And then the last piece I want to also say is IP is not just hardware and software. You also have to look at data as your IP, and a lot of technology companies don't even look at data as an IP that they generate as part of this process. So I just want to make sure I cover the data aspect of this as well, because for a startup, that makes a company a lot more valuable if you have that data IP, because data could be IP itself.
Yeah. Sounds good. And while you're talking about IP, maybe I can mention the following question that's about IP. I mean, if you would recommend applying for SBIR, STTR for prototyping after submission of a provisional patent. Do you have any thoughts about that? I don't see a problem with that.
Yeah, you should apply it at any time. Like if the government, at the end of the day, the government will only want to, if they want to invest in you with non-dilutive funding, they only want you to be successful. So you don't have to worry about like your IP being stolen by the federal government. If you can get free money, by all means, keep doing it, because it will help de-risk your business.
Yeah, that sounds good. And maybe I have a question for Chris from Ian too. What do angels want to see in a founder? And I guess, are there any red flags or, traits that you're looking for in a founder as an angel investor?
Sure. So I mentioned this a couple of times already, right? So there's a saying that you want to bet on the jockey, not the horse, right? So the management team by far is probably the one of the most important things that we look for as angel investors. So some of the key characteristics is whether the founding teams has the competency in terms of excelling in the future, right? So given this deep tech, you have a technical co-founders who've been there, done it before, who can focus on the research and development and really be able to obtain some of these like the technical milestones, right, in terms of like operating fidelity or other things like Qubit, increasing Qubit lifetime or something like that, right? So more on the quantum end, right? So, but as I discussed earlier, right, it's also important to have, for the founders to have that vision, right? Grand vision in terms of what I envision, what the 3 years will look like, 5 years will look like, right? So what will be the end game, right? So we definitely would not want to invest in a lifestyle business. We all of us want to exit at some point, and so we need that vision there. And to answer your question, Ian, right? Ideally, if you being a serial entrepreneur, you have some sort of success in the past, right? That makes it a lot easier for us to believe in you and trusting you at the first place. But that's not really the prerequisite, right? We also funded like first-time entrepreneur as well, right? But just that study says that if you are the second timer or you have some exit in the past, the success rate is slightly higher.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe the next one can be for Lisheng. there's a lot of doom and gloom in the VC community regarding the future valuations and startups raising efforts. How do you think this will impact the quantum photonics startups? Will it be harder to raise rounds for the deep tech startups in the future? I guess, I think we touched on this, but maybe you can comment.
Yeah, I think it's the VC's job to invest. They get paid by the LP to invest. So it would not be wise for them not to invest for a long period of time. So I think it's all temporary, right? Once I think it does settles, people have a little bit clarity of what the future looks like, they're definitely going to invest more. Honestly, the seed investments after so many years, if you look at valuation, 6 million, 8 million, is there a difference? Yes, there's a little bit difference, but when you look at innovations like quantum computing or fusion, once you get there, it's such a gigantic market to grab. I honestly don't think that valuation and all that matters that much in early stage. It really is betting on the right team. As our panelists have mentioned, do you really have a great team? Are you really a good founder? Not just you've done that before, but also as young founders, are you coachable, right? You haven't done that before, but are you good at listening and taking experienced people's advice? So I think that great companies. This is a cliche already, right? And so many companies that were founded in the downturn, because founders think more about how do you be lean, how do you find the right problem to solve, how do you hire the right people, how do you keep your small and nimble culture and all that. Those are great things to position you very well in the bad time and good time. So I don't personally concern about I think the fundraising is temporary. I think eventually, once it bounces back, if the V-shaped bounce back, it bounces back even harder. So just be prepared when that bounce comes, right? And now you're just doing all your homework and to be ready when that bounce happens.
Yeah, I guess we have only time for one more question, but I think Jedri asked for two questions, but the first one we kind of went over already. So I'll take your second one. Where are the ecosystems of startups currently located in deep tech? So basically, what are, if there are any, specific major hubs, for deep tech investment that where you are looking for deals and funding?
East Tennessee. We're trying to build a hub there. I mean, I don't think there really is a deep tech hub. There are areas in Silicon Valley, right? Like a lot of autonomous vehicles and advancing some stuff in mobility. Where I don't know where a quantum hub would be. I'm trying to build something in Tennessee because of the great assets that exist there. But I would say, investors are now changing their mindset because of COVID. You don't have to live next door to them. People are more willing to hop on a Zoom call to talk to you, or even hop on a plane. And at the end of the day, deep tech can be super expensive, especially if you're building hard tech. So it doesn't make sense for you to build and scale a business and a supply chain in Silicon Valley or New York City. It makes much more sense for you to be in good old Tennessee.
Thanks, Tricia. I really like that. Well, let me give you some thoughts on the quantum hubs. There are definitely a lot of quantum hubs now that you should know about, right? So one, Chicago is a big one. They have a pretty good ecosystem over there. Maryland is another big one that they have a pretty good ecosystem there. Through QSF. Canada is a big one as well. Outside the country, Singapore also have a lot of funding going on. Australia have some, except it's a small market. But they have a lot of good research R&D ecosystem there. Europe is also a good one as well. So those are, I would say, major hubs of quantum competencies that we have. I don't have a view on I think from a country standpoint, China is definitely well ahead, but I don't have a clear view of what's going on there, except I hear really good news of, all of the different breakthroughs that they're having in quantum. So I'm sure that's probably a robust ecosystem there as well.
Thank you, Nardo. I think we are running out of time, but we went through all the questions. I think this was a great session. I would like to thank everybody for the extremely interesting discussion, for your contributions. To the audience, please connect with us. We have a website for our Quantum and Photonics Accelerator. You can click on the links in the chat and apply. And please don't forget, we have another event in 2 weeks. If you'd like to follow us, please register for that event. The link is also in the chat. And thanks everybody for the lovely evening and discussion. Hope to see you at the next event. Goodbye.